In this very high yield video, we're going to be talking about the trinucleotide repeats. This is brought to you by Dirty Medicine. The four diseases that each have trinucleotide repeats that you need to know for USMLE and COMLEX are depicted on this slide. The reason that trinucleotide repeats are so high yield is because the way that they occur, that is, through the genetic problem of having a trinucleotide expansion, is a pretty genetically rare event. And because of that, examiners latch onto these four diseases and love to test you about the different symptoms, findings, genetic modes of inheritance, and above all else, the actual trinucleotide repeat. So all of the different components of these four diseases are extremely high yield and tend to show up on COMLEX and USMLE all the time. With that said, we're going to go through these diseases one at a time, carefully summarizing the genetic inheritance, the trinucleotide repeat, the symptoms and associated findings, and then for each of these four diseases, I'll give you a really awesome mnemonic to help you tie that all together, and of course, memorize the trinucleotide repeat that's unique to each of these four diseases. So let's go through these one at a time, beginning with Huntington's disease. So in Huntington's disease, the trinucleotide repeat is CAG, and this is an autosomal dominant inherited disease. The symptoms of Huntington's are aggression, psychosis, chorea, and dementia. Now, the findings that you should probably be familiar with are the different changes in neurotransmitters and different neurologic regions of the brain. So you've got increased levels of dopamine, decreased levels of acetylcholine, decreased levels of GABA, and decreasing size of the caudate. So the way that you can tie this all together is by using a really simple mnemonic that I've come up with years ago. And that mnemonic is that you can't aim great when you hunt for an animal. So the reason that this is the mnemonic for Huntington's disease is because the mnemonic, we're using the hunt part of Huntington's. And because hunters go out and try to aim their guns and shoot animals, we're saying that you can't aim great when you hunt for an animal. So what does this tell us? Well, can't aim great, CAG, is the repeat. So the trinucleotide repeat is the first three words of this mnemonic. Can't aim great. When you hunt for an animal, well, hunt is just telling us that we're talking about Huntington's disease. 4 is telling us that this is actually conferred through a problem with chromosome 4, and the AN in an animal tells you that Huntington's disease features something called genetic anticipation. Genetic anticipation is actually really high yield to understand. Basically what it means is that, let's say that you're the first generation in your family to get Huntington's. You might get it around age 60. The next generation will get it younger than you, so they might get it around age 45. And then the next generation, if this gets passed down, will get it even younger than that. They might get it around age 35. And that's what genetic anticipation is. Basically, in subsequent generations, the persons affected by the disease get it earlier in life. That's genetic anticipation. But again, just to summarize everything that I've talked about, Huntington's disease, we're talking about hunting. So the mnemonic is that you can't aim great when you hunt for an animal. Can't aim great for CAG, trinucleotide repeat. Hunt reminds us that we're talking about Huntington's disease. 4 tells us this is a problem on chromosome 4. And in animal, AN, is anticipation, because this disease features genetic anticipation. So subsequent generations get the disease earlier and earlier than the generations that were affected before them. The other thing that I really like about this mnemonic is that if you think about the symptoms of Huntington's disease, if you get them and you were actually trying to go out and hunt, you wouldn't be able to aim great. You can't aim great because think about it, you have chorea. So if you have chorea, you're not going to be able to hold a sniper rifle up to your face and shoot an animal. You're just not going to be able to do it. If you have psychosis or dementia, probably not going to be able to aim great, right? So understanding the symptoms of Huntington's also tie in to my awesome mnemonic. So that's Huntington's disease, where you can't aim great when you hunt for an animal. That's all you need to know about Huntington's disease. Let's now talk about Fragile X syndrome. So Fragile X syndrome, the trinucleotide repeat is CGG. And this is an X-linked dominant disease, which is pretty easy to remember because in the name of the disease, you see the giant letter X. So this is X-linked dominant. The symptoms include macroorchidism, intellectual disability, long face, and large ears. And here's a cartoon depiction of what that tends to look like. What will really give away Fragile X syndrome on USMLE or COMLEX is the macroorchidism, so I've bolded that for you here. And because that's the key symptom that you should focus on, of course, in addition to the long face and long ears, we need to have a mnemonic that reminds us about large testicles. So the way that I remember this is with congenitally giant gonads, for CGG. The trinucleotide repeat in Fragile X syndrome is CGG, congenitally giant gonads. That will tell you that the predominant symptom in Fragile X syndrome will be macroorchidism, but also don't forget the long face and the long ears. And that's it. That's it. Fragile X, pretty simple. That's all I need you to know. Let's talk next about Friedreich's ataxia. So Friedreich's ataxia is probably the most complex and difficult to understand, but I'm going to simplify this for you. The trinucleotide repeat in Friedreich's ataxia is GAA, GA. And the inheritance pattern is autosomal recessive. So this is the only one of these 4 diseases that is autosomal recessive. So for that reason, it should stick out a little bit in your brain. The symptoms include ataxia and what is sometimes referred to as a staggering gait, hammer toes, pes cavus, which is an increased arch in the foot, and scoliosis. It's also really important in high yield to understand that the most common cause of death in patients with Friedreich's ataxia is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So HCM, or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, is heavily associated with Friedreich's ataxia. Now, Friedreich's ataxia is the one of these 4 diseases where I think it's really important to understand the pathophysiology of what happens that leads to all of these symptoms in the nervous system. So Friedreich's ataxia, again, is an autosomal recessively inherited disease that causes the trinucleotide repeat GAA, or GA, to lead to a defect in the frataxin gene. Normally, the frataxin gene is responsible for shuffling iron into cells. So when a normal functioning frataxin gene is doing its job under physiologic conditions, the perfect amount of iron comes into cells. But when you get Friedreich's ataxia and you knock out the frataxin gene, you can no longer put the right amount of iron into cells, and instead, an overabundance of iron gets shuffled into the cells. And when you have cells that are just flooded with iron, different intracellular components are going to be damaged. And in the case of Friedreich's ataxia, the one part of the cell that takes the most damage is the mitochondria. So if you zoomed in on a microscope under the cell, you would see damaged mitochondria. And if mitochondria cannot produce energy and it cannot produce ATP for the cell to function, you're going to get dysfunction. And this dysfunction occurs predominantly in the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And it's that pathophysiology that manifests itself as the neurologic findings such as inability to walk, having an abnormal gait, and then the structural findings, of course, of hammer toes, pes cavus, scoliosis, etc. So this is all really important to know, and you need to know that the pathophys, kind of behind the scenes here, is an abnormal iron accumulation due to a defect in the frataxin gene. Now, just in case the test writers want to get fancy and show you some pictures, I want you to see what hammer toes and pes cavus looks like, because if you see these pictures, you should think Friedreich's ataxia, or you should think autosomal recessive, or GA, trinucleotide repeats. So you have to be able to associate all of these symptoms with one another. Hammer toes kind of look like exactly what the name describes. Your toes are just popped up like little hammers. And pes cavus is an increased arch of the foot. So those are the physical findings of Friedreich's ataxia. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dirty. How am I going to remember all this crap? Well, here's what we're going to do. So first, the disease is called Friedreich's ataxia, right? Ataxia means that you can't walk or that you stagger and fall down. And we also need to remember that the trinucleotide repeat is GA, G-A-A, GA. So how are we going to tie this together? Well, this makes me think of Lady Gaga. Gaga, Lady Gaga, okay? And if you're music fans, or maybe you saw her concert in October of 2018, Lady Gaga jumped up onto a fan, and then the fan tried to stand up and he fell off the stage with Lady Gaga. So I remember that Lady Gaga was ataxic and fell. Go on YouTube and watch the video of her falling. It's kind of funny. Everyone was fine, so you're allowed to laugh at it. But Lady Gaga, Gaga for G-A-A, was ataxic and fell. The word ataxic reminds me that we're talking about Friedreich's ataxia. So this is my mnemonic to remember GAA for Friedreich's ataxia, Lady Gaga. So we're done 3 of 4, and let's wrap up with myotonic dystrophy type 1. In myotonic dystrophy type 1, the trinucleotide repeat is CTG, and the inheritance here is autosomal dominant. The main symptom of myotonic dystrophy type 1 is that you get problems with the distal extremity musculature. Specifically, when the muscle contracts, it has a difficult time releasing that contraction. Sometimes this is written as distal extremity weakness. Other times it's written as distal muscle hypercontractility. There's different ways that they can write this out, but just remember, distal extremity weakness, usually in the forearms and the hand. The associated findings include cataracts, testicular atrophy, and hypogammaglobulinemia. And I'll tie the mnemonic into helping you remember these associated findings because they are really high yield. Now, on exams, on USMLE and COMLEX, what the test writer is probably going to do is try to clue you into the distal extremity weakness. And how they're going to do that is they're going to describe one of 3 scenarios. They're going to say that the person can't release their grip when they're opening a door, so they can't release the doorknob, that they can't release their grip when they are turning a screwdriver, and that they can't release their grip when they're engaging in a handshake with somebody. So all of these collectively for myotonic dystrophy type 1, you can't stop the contraction in the hand and the forearm. And it's for that reason that my mnemonic is can't terminate grip. So CTG is the trinucleotide repeat, and it's really handy that the mnemonic here is they can't terminate their grip. So if you start to grip something and turn, handshake, doorknob, screwdriver, it doesn't matter, can't terminate grip. CTG is the trinucleotide repeat for myotonic dystrophy type 1. And conveniently, all of the associated findings are also CTG, cataracts, testicular atrophy, and gammaglobulinemia, which is short for hypogammaglobulinemia. So that's myotonic dystrophy type 1, and now we've gone through each of the 4 trinucleotide repeats, and now let's do a summary chart. So again, here's your summary. What you need to take out of this video are the trinucleotide repeats for each of these 4 diseases, the modes of inheritance, and the main symptoms. So Huntington's disease, can't aim great when you hunt for an animal. Fragile X syndrome, congenitally giant gonad, CGG. Friedreich's ataxia, well, who's ataxic? Lady Gaga. Ga, GAA for Gaga. And then myotonic dystrophy type 1, remember problems with distal extremity weakness, and therefore they can't terminate their grip, or CTG. So those are the trinucleotide repeats. I know that I went rather quickly, but it's an easy topic to know if you use the Dirty Medicine mnemonics. Good luck.